of what they do. And Canada is just absolutely, I say it, and sometimes people smile and sometimes they say, great idea, but Canada, their taxes would come down greatly. Their security would go up greatly. Amazing things happen to Canada. And really, Canada in this particular, why would we pay $200 billion a year in subsidies to Canada when they're not a state? You do that for a state, but you don't do that for somebody else's country. So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
When Donald Trump became president again in 2025, the idea that Canada could become America's 51st state suddenly exploded online. Some people laughed, others debated it seriously. Even Trump himself teased the idea, talking about tax cuts, increasing security, and amazing things happening to Canada if it were a state. He asked the question out loud: why pay billions of subsidies to Canada when it's not part of the US? Could Canada be a serious contender to join the Union? But let's pause and look at reality.
Hi, Donald. My name's Stuart Rosenthal, the Governor of Canada. I self-identify as the Governor of Canada. I believe under Canadian law that makes me the Governor of this great state of Canada, the 51st state. I'll make you a deal, Donald. You support me in my governance as Governor of Canada for life, and I'll give you all the Alberta oil. How's that? I'll give you free advice, too. You go and you take Qatar. You take all their oil and gas. I think it's mostly gas, but who cares? Terrorist state. They funded terrorism. That means that gas is yours. America's rich again. Let's go, Donald. With that oil and that gas and them together, we take Venezuela's oil. Bro, we are rolling.
Canada is a sovereign country. It has its own constitution, parliamentary democracy, military, courts, and federal system. For Canada to join the United States, it would need the consent of Canadians, provincial governments, parliament, and Senate, not to mention U.S. congressional approval. That alone makes the idea virtually impossible. Even from a legal standpoint, the U.S. Constitution doesn't provide a clear pathway for annexing a large independent country with tens of millions of people. Any attempt will trigger legal battles, international condemnation, and decades of political chaos. Canada's political culture is fundamentally different. 2. Parliamentary democracy, a constitutional monarchy, and a Charter of Rights that functions differently from the U.S. Bill of Rights. The balance of power between the federal and provincial governments cannot be simply folded into Washington's system. And the people? Canadians overwhelmingly reject the idea. They value their healthcare system, social policies, and democratic processes. Polls consistently show near unanimous opposition to merging with the US, regardless of who's the president. So when the 51st state charter surfaced in 2025, it wasn't a serious policy discussion. It was a combination of Trump's rhetoric, media amplification, and online fantasy. Canada remains independent, sovereign, and unshakable. And no US presidency, no matter how bombastic, changes that fact.
Just they get along very well. They like each other a lot.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together. And we have done that in the past. And part of that, as the president just said, is with respect to our own security. And my government is committed for a step change in our investment in Canadian security and our partnership. And I'll say this as well, that the president has revitalized international security, revitalize NATO,
True.
and us playing our full weight in NATO, and that will be part.
That's true. And they have. I must say, Canada is stepping up the military participation because Mark knew, they were low, and now they're stepping it up, and that's a very important thing. But never say never. Ever say never.
Trump's presidency sparked renewed chatter about Canada becoming the 51st state. His arguments focused on dollars and resources, subsidies, taxes, oil and natural gas. But beyond the rhetoric lies a deeper economic reality. Canada is far too complex and integrated in its own systems for annexation to make sense. Canada trades with the US, yes, but it's also a major player in global markets. Its industries, from energy to agriculture, operate under Canadian law, Canadian regulation, and Canadian taxation. Suddenly, changing the system to fit US rules will be an economic earthquake, not a windfall. Even the simplest assumptions, like Canada will pay less taxes or security will improve, ignore the massive costs of systemic disruption. Businesses, workers, and provinces would resist any abrupt integration. Supply chains, trade agreements, and financial institutions are calibrated to Canadian governance. You can't just flip a switch and make it all American. And that's without mentioning cultural, economics, healthcare, education, social programs, the very systems Trump claimed could improve are embedded in Canadian society. Annexation would create chaos, not efficiency. The lesson? The 51st state idea may sound like a quick economic win to some, but in reality, it would be a logistical and financial disaster. Canada is an independent economic power, and no presidency in 2025 or beyond can rewrite that.
America can't invade Canada. Trump can't conquer Canada. America is not in a position to conquer anyone. When I was working on the next Civil War, I spoke with a lot of counterinsurgency experts from the United States, and they made it pretty clear that the American military has learned painfully over the course of 70 years that you cannot really hold a population against its will, even if only a tiny fragment of that population considers you holding them against their will. So, if they can't hold Baghdad, I'm not sure why they think they can hold Montreal. But the truth is that what this is really is the ramblings of lunacy and imminent breakdown. And that's what it's really a symptom of. I mean, I think you can see Los Angeles is burning and they can't stop it. They can't even stop blaming each other for it. Ordinary citizens, some with Ivy League degrees, are starting to kill their business elites and to widespread approval. They don't have even a shred of solidarity. And to make war, you need solidarity. And that is the one thing they absolutely don't have. America's also not used to fighting wars that aren't divided from them by an ocean. They would suddenly have an enemy that was along this huge border. And also, they're extremely vulnerable to attacks on their homeland. They're not a people used to suffering for war, which inevitably they would in this fantasy situation. That doesn't mean that Canada's out of the woods or that suddenly we're not under threat. We're actually under very deep threat, and we need to prepare for economic, political, social, and cultural chaos. It's just actual conquest is not really in the cards.
From a military and geopolitical standpoint, annexing Canada is impossible. Experts agree that the US cannot occupy a population against its will. Historical lessons from Iraq, Afghanistan, and other interventions have proven that even advanced militaries struggle to control cities where the population resists. Imagine trying that across 4,000 miles of Canadian border with 40 million people who are overwhelmingly united in their opposition. Canada's strength lies not just in its borders, but in its institutions, courts, provinces, federal governance, and NATO partnerships make the country a coordinated and independent actor. And in 2025, with rising domestic instability in the US, there's no appetite for the massive logistical, political, and social strains such an annexation will create. Economically, politically, and socially, Canada benefits from being independent. It negotiates its own trade deals, invests in its own security and maintain sovereignty over its resources, including oil, gas, and Arctic access. Becoming a US state would destroy decades of careful planning and national identity. Even Trump, in meetings and media appearances, couldn't overcome one simple fact: Canada is not for sale. Not then, not now, not ever. The 51st state fantasy resurfaced in 2025 because of Trump's rhetoric, but it collapses under the weight of law, culture, and reality.
No.